Hello everyone, here you show you right here. I'm talking about for time, and a lot of times it sure seems that way that do we necessarily think about time to where talk about for setting any sorts of goals and achievements or anything like that. But a lot of times it sure seems that way that really that how many of us have heard that so far as saying is toward a time, for what time they can make a difference. And so it sure seems that way to where whenever time that you do look at a time clock or something like that, it sure seems that way that how many of us are really gonna think about that to where to eat. But every time you think about the time clock right there, then maybe you're gonna maybe think about is toward are you necessarily picturing maybe a smiley face right there on a clock right there, and maybe if that smiley face is trying to tell you something so far as most of the time, and I'm sure most of us may have seen that before, to where especially if you were getting ready to take a test or something like that, take any sort of quiz, like any sort of exam or some sort, and it seems like to me that a lot of times that the time that's given, just to be able to answer a few questions and also anything else that comes to your mind to where that you know, yeah, that that there's a difference between taking your time and then being I'm like talk about being pressured under time and all, but still. But you talk about right here of like with most of the time though that when we think about time, that do we necessarily think about the type of a time to where we actually set a goal? And so a lot of times it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that are we necessarily thinking about goals and achievements most of the time? And so it sure seems that way that working right here with these five colors right here, but talk about with time though, and so how many of us have really thought about that to where that when we look at the clock like that right there, and at 1:02, yeah, it just looks a little bit like the sun right there, but still that talk about between day and night right here, right? But still that how many teachers or parents are going to maybe think about this to where that if you can maybe set a goal to where that a specific time. So let's just say altogether that there will be 24 hours out of a whole day, right? And then let's just say that out of those 24 hours of a whole day, but then let's just say that somebody was going to ask you that what all can you really get done within the 12 hours of timing. So let's just say that between maybe between noon and maybe 4 p.m., something like that, and knowing about the things that you're able to accomplish and achieve and all. But so it's like, so a lot of times that you want to know too that what does that usually mean when we talk about time right here to where that you go ahead and set like any source of goal and achievement. And so it's like, just be surprised on what you're able to find out, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way when we think about time, though. It sure seems that way most of the time when we do think about time, though, that it's like, really, 10 hours, though. And so I could just use that like a word phrase, like normally it would be like 12 hours, but let's just say right here it would be like for 10 hours right here. So a lot of times it's like how do you know whenever time can talk, really talk about for 10 hours right here. So really think about that to where that do most teachers maybe think about is that a way of how to teach their students very well about to talk about the time differences, though, is that what sorts of achievements that you're able to gather. I'm like, what sorts of goals and achievements that you can get within the 10 hours time. In 10 hours, to a lot of us, I'm like, 10 minutes seems like, I'm like, like everybody else would say too, that a lot of things that a lot of times let's say that if anything that there's a lot of things that maybe that you're not able to get done, if anything, within the 3 weeks timing, if that. But a lot of times it sure seems that way that if we would actually do the calculations right here and want to know just a little bit too, just like draw like a little smiley face right here, and just want to know too about talk about for time, is that think about the things that you're able to get done within the 10 hours timing. And it sure seems that way that the only thing people might even be able to think about number one though is like whenever the clock right here strikes on like to noon right here, and so yeah, that talk about with the time right here, but still that but it sure seems that way that when we think about time, that are we necessarily thinking about like teachers when maybe ask a student does to where that if you can go ahead and set a goal to where you go ahead and pick a specific time that you would like to set for a goal, and let's just say for that achievement though that you would like to maybe like it's kind of like a just a little bit, and like people might even say too that I'm like we might even say too, if you're going to set a goal of an achievement to where that you go ahead and say to where you go ahead and agree to where that you're going to go ahead and take care of something maybe within 4 hours time. So let's just say that you have right here like like have right here is the first and second hand right here. So let's just say that all by measure but the line charts, huh? But still, so it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that hey, how many people have maybe thought about that to where that if you were to set a desired time to get something done, and let's just say that you go ahead and pick up like maybe 8 a.m. or something like that, and like in case if anybody may ask me too, that a lot of times if you're going to be setting up if you're going to be scheduling any job interviews or anything like that, then most of the time that the times that you usually pick are usually between 8 and 10 a.m. something like that, right? And so it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that why do you think that most of the time that you would pick at that time on your schedule, then maybe compared to like maybe an afternoon time or maybe 2 p.m. time, something like that? And a lot of everybody else might even say that, well, really, if you were to pick that time by desire, then maybe that means is toward that that won't really give you a whole lot of time, and like the late evening to afternoon hours to take care of anything else that you were going to take care of that afternoon. So that's why that if you're going to be scheduling like a doctor's appointment or something like that, that if you were to look at the time and want to know too that a lot of everybody else would maybe pick the early morning hours just because of the fact that it's that's a time of the day where most of the time that you get up early that morning, and then at least that you're able to get breakfast, and then also if you're it's like everybody else would say too that that's usually they're going to go ahead and pick maybe an early morning time just because that gives them not enough time to go ahead and take care of anything else that they got to take care of or something like that. But it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that it's like, do we really have a choice to where that have control over what time it is, and that like I want to know too that when we're talking about the time, though, that when we think about time, that do we necessarily think about is that if you were to go ahead and pick a time by desire, let's just say that if you were to maybe set like to where like the year to where that maybe that you've been working on a goal or achievement or something like that, and let's just say that it's going to maybe take 3 years just to be able to come up to any source of accomplishment, and 102 that people are going to maybe ask you that if you would actually do the calculations, it's maybe you might say is to where it's going to maybe it's more likely it's going to take you up to 3 years just to be able to get this arranged and get that worked out. And so a lot of times it's like that when we think about the time, though, that time can mean forever, right? But let's just say that if you were to kind of I can just kind of chunk it down to where that if you were to actually if you were to break it down break down the minutes, the hours and the minutes, though, and let's just say that somebody were to ask you to where that hey, what all can you get done within the 12 hours timing? So let's just say that you got one hand right here, and then one hand right here, right? So let's just say that within 5 hours timing, and let's just say like, would teachers maybe ask somebody as to where that really think about the things that you're able to get done within 5 hours timing. There's a lot of things that you probably can get done in 5 hours timing, and at the time you want to know too that each time you look at a time clock, it seems like that a lot of things, like every time you look at a time clock, you're going to maybe think about it. It's like, yeah, the time crush, or you think that you got plenty of time to take care of that, and find out that something else comes up, and a lot of times it sure seems that way, that's the case. That, whenever something else comes up, and then that's whenever you're not able to take care of that. And so it's like, at the time, it sure seems that way, even though that at one time that you had nearly 12 hours to take care of something, but then whenever something else comes up, and knowing about that, for what you had to take care of next. But it sure seems that way, that when we think about the time clock here, that why is it that most of the time that it seems like that you're trying to take care of a number of things within a certain time of the hour, right? And you might think that, yeah, well, really, that 12 hours, but 12 hours to a lot of us might seem like to where that, yeah, well, really, that a lot of things that you might think that it's totally impossible to be able to get it done within 12 hours time. And you may want to know too that really, can you really do the calculations like that to where you're able to keep track of the things that you are able to get done within 12 hours timing, then compared to the things that's going to maybe take you maybe a full week, just to be able to get it all worked out and arranged. And so that's why it sure seems that way, that if you were to go ahead and maybe write in any source of, any source of a paper document or anything like that about time, that what's the best way. And I know, like everybody else would say too, that really, why would anybody really recommend doing that, to where you go ahead and write down, like, to where that you go ahead and set a time. And I can go ahead and add like a little box right here, and I'm like, I guess like everybody else would say too, that if it would make you feel just a little bit better, to where you can go ahead and write down a time, a specific time. And if you want to look at that more like a goal, like any source of achievement, you want to look at this time as like an achievement, to where, you want to see how much you can get done in 8 hours. So to me, I'm like, see, how much can you get done in 8 hours? And like almost all of us will probably say too, that, the only thing that you can maybe think about that you can get done, in 8 hours, if anything, is maybe cleaning the carpets, or maybe doing, vacuuming the floors, or maybe, if it's maybe making deliveries, or maybe making phone calls, or any sorts of jobs that we could probably think about. But still, that really, what can we get done in 8 hours? And let's just say that if you were to set a goal, and like anybody else, or maybe 102, that what does that usually mean whenever you do think about that. And you'll likely say too that has anybody asked you to where you go ahead and set a goal, to where you put right there as a year right there. And let's just say that if you were to pick a time in general, and let's just say starting by 8 a.m. that next morning, that these are the things, the achievements that you want to start out with. And the first thing that you want to think about is that what you're able to take care of within the 5 hours timing, just to kind of get you a head start with all the work, and all the hard work and effort that you put into taking care of something. And so it sure seems that way, that how often are teachers really going to maybe ask anybody about doing something like that, so far as that writing down a time in general, to where that you want to set a goal and achievement. And I know with me, I think I mentioned before to everybody here about most of the time that whenever I do dream about things, I actually think of most of the time about whenever whenever people I'm like, whenever, if I were to make a suggestion, let's just say that there's another number of people who do people of the group that are going to agree to where, yeah, if you make a suggestion about something and about how many people they're really going to follow up about that. And most of the time, it's like, well, it's all about the fact about if that suggestion works. If it works, like, yeah, if somebody is seeing that those suggestions are working, and the fact that it's getting somebody's attention, especially, and so that's why it sure seems that way. That whenever we think about time, no, we're not necessarily thinking about any source of compass, right? I'm like, we're not thinking about north, south, east, and west here. I'm like, so it's like about every time we think about north, south, east, or west, no, but still, the northeast and northeast, west. But so like, yeah, if for any source of compass readings, especially. And the way we think about that, though, is that, would any teacher necessarily think about is that, would you really want to ask the questions about, do you really have a time goal specified? And let's just say that, well, what does that basically mean right there? Well, it pretty much means is that, I can just put on here and all these corners right here, go ahead and put 5 right here. 5 here and 5 here. That looks very confusing, and I know we might even say too that looks very confusing right there. Why does that have to be so confusing right there? Well, it seems like to me though it's all about testing your knowledge about what I'm like, yeah, that this half of the, if you want to kind of call it the diameter readings or anything like that, but still that, so if we were to start out our afternoon or morning doing counterclockwise, if you want to do it like clockwise right here, starting from north to south right here. So let's just say that altogether this right here would measure at about 10 hours right here. So let's just say that, from morning to like afternoon time, and what are you able to accomplish within the 5 hours timing? So it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that, what does that usually mean if somebody were to be talking to you about a time specified? And time specified, what I mean by is that, a time that you suggest compared to the time for what's originally scheduled. So it sure seems that way that when we think about time on general, though, that I guess there's a difference between, like everybody say too, that whenever you do start writing something, and let's just say that if you were to pick a time, a specific time in general, and let's just say that if you were to start out the sentence by stating toward by 8 a.m. By 8 a.m. This is what you're going to be working on, and that's what you're going to be achieving, right? And it sure seems that way that when we think about time, though, that it's like, if you were to pick a specific time for what you're going to be working on, so far as your goals and achievements, a lot of times, and it sure seems that way that they have. How many of us have thought about that to where that whenever you do look at the time, that you're going to maybe think about that to where that is that another way of how do you want to set the rules and boundaries, like to where if you were to pick a time in general for any source of activity that you're going to maybe going to, maybe a concert or maybe an event, maybe a summer event or something like that's going on, and you want to know too that if you were to pick a time in general, and let's just say if it is 8 a.m., and let's just say that you pick that time just because is that just because if it's an easier to remember time number, or if it's because that that's usually around the time that you have best of luck, during the morning time or something like that, or I'm like, yeah, any time particular, but I usually I would probably say you'll pick 8 a.m. in general, just because that if you have a scheduled interview, or like most of the time, that if you're going to be the first person in line to take care of something important, and that's usually what I would say about is toward the earliest. The earliest is the best, earliest on time, and but still but in case of anybody were to ask me though that if you were to pick a particular time of the morning, then what do you think they would be, and what do you think that you would want to accomplish then? And it sure seems that way. That why does that seem to be like everybody else would say too? That if you had a choice between what time of the particular day that you would like to go with, and like let's just say that maybe if it is for a doctor's appointment, or maybe if it is to listen, I'm like yeah to tune into the headline news or something like that. And so whenever we think about that, though, or talk about for the time right here, and whenever we think about that, though, it's like really, most of the time, if you were to think about a goal and achievement to where that you go ahead and pick a particular time to whenever you want to go ahead and start working on something, and from the time that whenever you paused, or maybe the time that you stopped, and then whenever you start working on that task. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, well, really, that if it's like anybody says to her, really, if time could talk, then what exactly do you think that it will be telling you in general? And it sure seems that way. That every time you look at the time, though, it's maybe going to remind you that that something is missing. Number one, so it's like if you're going to be looking at a time clock, then you might not even see a face right here. What you might see is like a little LED display light or something like that right there. But still, but let's just say that on average, though, that if you're going to be looking at the time right here, and if you're going to be working on something, and most of the time, that what I'm usually thinking about is that if I I'm like, if I could remember all what I was supposed to do, or what I was supposed to, I'm like, if you were trying to work on an important task or something like that, and it sure seems that way almost every time you're looking at the clock like that, and you're probably thinking too that, hey, am I missing something here? And so like almost all the time, it seems like that's usually the case. Am I missing something here? And so it sure seems that way that, that about every 30 seconds or so, and like you say, whenever you do look at the clock right there, and it sure seems that way that if you do look at the clock mirror for a few seconds, and is that going to kind of give you an idea about, were you able to do everything that you were going to work on? Or I'm like, yeah. So, and like in case if we're 102, if we were to maybe like say is to where, whenever you look at the time right there, it's maybe going to remind you just a little bit of like, the sleeping. I'm like, if you're going to be using a clock to set a goal to where that you're going to try to get at least 5 hours of sleep, before you have to get up and maybe take your medicine or go out for some exercises or anything like that, anything fitness related or something like that, and that's why it sure seems that way that whenever we think about the time clock right there, that I think is to where you look at the time right there, and at 102, that really that can time really talk? And then even if it could, then maybe that it will probably tell you this to where well, really that whenever you first start working on something, though, it sure seems that way to where that you set goals, right, and achievements, right, and out of those goals and achievements, that you may not be able to accomplish all of them, but let's just say if you're able to accomplish at least one or two of them, and what I say is to where well, really that if you've been working on something for at least 5 hours in 102, that the first thing that you're going to say is to where that well, really, if it's really going to do you any good, just by that for how hard you worked on something. And so a lot of times, my parents would say too, to tell their kids that if they're proud of them just for trying, and if you be working hard on something, and let's just say that for the most part that you were working hard on something, and then find out that you were trying to impress somebody, or maybe if you were trying to surprise somebody, and they say that since about 2 o'clock, that's whenever you start working on that, and then but still, you're able. I'm like, most of the time, most kids might even say too that if it's cleaning their rooms, or if it's maybe doing chores around the house or something like that, and they'll probably say something like, yeah, that they're able to work on this, get this done within 4 hours timing. And let's just say that, yeah, the way we think about that, though, that how many teachers are maybe going to say to where that, yeah, well, really, that if you were to pick a time in general, though, then, to set a number of goals and achievements, and, what time do you think that you would pick? And I would say between 8 a.m. and let's just say if it's maybe between noon and 5, people might want to know too that if you could maybe pick a time in general, then maybe I don't know. I guess I could say maybe 4:30, like anybody else would say too. That yeah, well, really, how often are we going to maybe ask that question also? That talk about between 12 and 12:30. That's between a half hour of advance, right? So it sure seems that way. That yeah, that whenever, and most of the time that a lot of parents would probably say too that if they see that you're halfway done with the chores and with the process. So, and I really don't know about all parents, but let's just say that on average though that how often is 30 minutes going to be extended to what I'm like, yeah, if it's going to be maybe important deadlines, or maybe if it's maybe going to be anything about important tasks or anything like that. And we're 102 that one best way of how to be able to get yeah, for an extension. And so it's like, yeah, for any source of extension. And so it sure seems that way that when we speak about extensions, talking about that they give you longer. It means longer timing, and a lot of times it's like, yeah, that. So let's just say that, yeah, that whenever you first start working on a goal, and it sure seems that way that if you're almost done, and most of the time if that person can see that you're still working hard on it, and then you're almost done, and then a lot of times parents might say that, yeah, well, most of the time extensions, they'll give you more time if they can see that you're almost done, or that you've really been working hard at it. And but still that but the way I think about too, though, that when we talk about time, though, that how often are we gonna think about that, to where that you pick a particular day, to where that whenever you're trying to work on something, and maybe if you were to just think about a particular day, and like I'm like, yeah, if you're working hard on something, and let's just say that if you're trying to within the next 3 years, if you're working hard on something, and want to know too that, yeah, well, really, about how hard how long do you think that would take just to be able to achieve a lot of those goals. And but one thing I did want to mention also, Boz, is that yeah, that talking about with like suggestions though, and like with me though, if I were to make a suggestion, no, that a lot of times that's a lot of times when the way I like is that whenever I make a suggestion, no, and people might say that, hey, that if you could, you can't really set the rules and the guidelines for how things need to be done and all that. But let's just say if you were to make one suggestion, though, and people might even say too that whenever you do look at the clock like that, and let's just say that yeah, if you could, if you were to look at the clock, then maybe the chances are that you would be able to pick a time of day, toward it. Yeah, if you would actually pick a time of day, if you had that option to where you could pick a particular time of a day, just to be able to, to take care of something or to do something, and what do you think that time of day would be? And people might even say that, well, really, that if anything between 5:30 and 6 o'clock, usually, and so it's like, yeah, that before 7 p.m., that late the afternoon or something like that. So it's like, yeah. So it sure seems that way that when we think about the time right here, that it sure seems that way that yeah, how often are teachers really going to tell their students about that, to where that there are 24 hours in a whole day, aren't but still that if you could maybe pick a particular time out of a day, to where it gives you at least 8 hours, just to be able to work on your achievements, on your goals and achievements. And let's just say that if you were